Louisville Business First is proud to partner with the University of Louisville's Christina Lee Brown Envirom Institute on topics that bring experts together to discuss critical issues for our community. Today's event follows recent conversations we've had about the intersection of climate and health, disaster preparedness, and our community's town and gown relationship. I want to thank each of you for making time for today's program, which is a complicated but necessary topic for us to talk about. At the heart of this morning's conversation is this question: how can we build and sustain a culture that values both the right for citizens to live a full and healthy life with the right to own firearms? We know that firearm-related injuries and deaths are preventable, and we know that gun violence adversely affects our health in a number of ways, including physical health and mental health, from stress, trauma, and anxiety. So what can this city and its citizens do to find that right balance when it comes to firearms? And that's what we're here to talk about today.
Thank you so much to everyone with the Envirom Institute for everything that you all do throughout our city on a regular basis. You are making our city smarter, more progressive, safer, and of course, healthier for everyone. Thank you all so much. Thanks to Business First, thanks to Ambassador Todd Sedgwick, thanks to County Attorney Michael Connell and our colleagues from LMPD and the administration and members of the public for joining us today for this important discussion that we are having, not just today, but all days throughout our city. I view our job, all of us at Metro government, our job is to make our city safer, stronger, and healthier. And of course, that work that we do at Metro government takes many forms. But keeping our people safe is our highest priority. Yet it's linked with also being a stronger city and a healthier city. As we've seen, tragically and far too often, gun violence is the single greatest threat to the safety of the people that we serve. And gun violence is a public health crisis, and we must treat it as such. There are long-term solutions that we're working on, but we have to take action now so fewer people die in our streets, in our banks, in our parks, in our churches, and in our schools. Today, tomorrow, and in the weeks, months, and years to come. And the reality is that taking meaningful action on gun violence requires help from our friends in Frankfurt and our friends in Washington, D.C. Over the past several months since becoming mayor, I've been talking with our legislative partners at the federal and state levels. And what I try to steer our conversations towards is this is not about partisan politics. This is about life and death. Regardless of your political affiliation, everybody agrees that we want there to be less gun violence. We want fewer people to die. This is about preventing tragedies. This is about working so we're not in September of 2024 and talking about the over 110 homicides that we've had this year in our city, the over 300 non-fatal shootings that we've had in our city, many of which are tragically caused by young people. People who were born into this world with the most challenging of circumstances and never had the support systems and love that many of us in this room had. There are steps that we can without a doubt take, reasonable, fair-minded steps that I know most people agree on and will make our city and every city safer. Strategies that will address the root causes of gun violence and strategies that will in short term reduce the number of guns that are in the wrong hands and that are used for the wrong reason. This should not be as hard as it is to do. I often think about our police officers. Chief Jackie Gwynn Biller-Owell is here today and will be taking part in the panel discussion. And when she and her officers and their whole team are on patrol, they're working to prevent crimes from happening, to keep people safe. And they every day have to strike a delicate balance between protecting public safety while preserving constitutional rights for everyone. That's what we expect them to do every day, every shift, every interaction. Because maintaining that balance is fundamental to the preservation of freedom and democracy, as well as safety. So I keep thinking, if we expect our police officers to strike that balance on the streets, sometimes under fire, then all of us in elected office, in the executive branch and the legislative branch, we should be able to strike that balance too. And our friends in Frankfurt and Washington, D.C. should be able to strike that balance when they're creating laws and policies in the Kentucky General Assembly and in Congress. We have to. They have to. We have to get rid of some of these ridiculous laws in Kentucky that tie our hands. We must repeal and change them so that cities, so that cities like Louisville can create solutions that we know will work to prevent needless deaths, so that we can keep everyone in our city safe. So much of the debate about guns seems to really just be arguing, and that leads to nothing. Arguing is not a strategy. Doing nothing is not a strategy or a solution, because the nothing that we're doing right now is getting people killed. We're seeing that every day in our city and in cities across the country. So we need new approaches, new thinking, fresh perspectives. And that's why today's discussion is so important. And that's why Ryan Busse is someone who is most definitely worth listening to. You'll hear his full story in a moment, but he's a proud gun owner, a hunter, and has a long career in the gun industry. And along the way, he realized that something had gone terribly wrong in our country and culture when it came to guns. And now, he's joined so many others of us who are working for safety and sanity in how America deals with guns and gun violence. I'm honored and proud to be here today with all of you. I look forward to hearing what Ryan, Ricky, the chief, David, and our entire panel has to say. And I'm excited to hear all of your thoughts and comments as we engage in Q&A with this distinguished and important panel this morning. Thank you all for volunteering some of your time to be a part in this discussion, to volunteering some of your time to help make Louisville a safer, stronger, and healthier city. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mayor Greenberg. You've set the scene perfectly for our conversation this morning. And now for today's discussion. Our moderator today is Todd Sedgwick, who served as U.S. Ambassador to the Slovak Republic from 2010 to 2015. He's a journalist, publisher, and entrepreneur, and has served on the boards of organizations such as the Civil War Preservation Trust, Shakespeare Theater Company, the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, and Foreign Policy for America. Let's welcome Todd to the stage. Our other panelists include Ryan Busse, a former firearms executive, environmental advocate, and the author of Gunfight: My Battle Against the Industry That Radicalized America. Ryan? Chief of the Louisville Metro Police Department, Jacqueline Gwynn Villarreal, who was appointed to the permanent police chief role in July after serving as interim chief. She began her law enforcement career in Atlanta in 1997. Let's welcome the chief. Also joining us is David Jones, Jr., a business and civic leader who is named chairman of the Humana Foundation Board of Directors this year, a self-proclaimed healthcare nerd. Jones is former chairman of the Jefferson County School Board and also serves as chairman and managing director of Chrysalis Ventures, a venture fund for early-stage investments. Thanks for joining us today, David. And Dr. Ricky Jones, the Baldwin Scholar in Residence for the Christina Lee Brown Envirom Institute and professor of Pan-African Studies at the University of Louisville. He has served as a social and political analyst for a number of media outlets and is an author and regular columnist for the Courier Journal and USA Today Network. Join us, Dr. Ricky Jones. And I'll now turn it over to Todd to start the conversation.
Well, first of all, Mayor Greenberg, thank you so much for your powerful words this morning. Really trenchant discussion of what you set the stage beautifully for what we're going to be talking about. And Lisa, thank you so much for partnering with the Environment Institute. Really appreciate Business First stepping up and conducting this important panel. Ryan, let me start with you, if I can. You've been in the firearms industry for 25 years. And you, like me, are a hunter. We own a lot of guns. We're comfortable around guns. And the guns have been part of our American culture for ever since the Republic started. But there have been some serious changes that you chronicle in your book in the gun industry. I wonder if you could share with the audience your observations.
Yeah, thank you. I grew up, many of the best parts of my life and my youth centered and revolved around guns. And I know that may sound odd to some people, but hunting and shooting with my brother or my grandfather or my dad really served as a kind of cultural bellwether for me. So I not only do I understand the cultural connection to guns from a lot of people in air quotes here, flyover country, but I'm one of those people who has that cultural connection. When I first entered the firearms industry, that sort of connection was respected, and it was balanced with a universal understanding of responsibility, the necessity for responsibility, how our right to own these guns must be balanced with a commensurate responsibility. And it's a very powerful right. You think about it, few rights are so incredibly powerful that they could, in just a moment or two, remove the rights of citizens in the room. Right? That's what the right to own guns does. So the commensurate balancing responsibility is incredibly important. The industry itself understood this for quite some time, for the first several years of my career, because it would not allow things like any kind of tactical gear, almost any AR-15s, tactical rifles, most high-capacity tactical pistols. They were not allowed to be displayed in the industry's own trade shows. Okay, this was not a law. This was not a regulation. This was not something imposed from Soviet Russia. This was a self-imposed norm of decency that the industry understood it must adhere to, right? It was balancing rights with responsibilities. Today, that sadly has changed. The sort of culture that we are propagating largely to young men in this country that essentially says you can and must fix your problems with tactical gear and machismo and high capacity magazines, and these can be the answer to your problems. That did not exist in the industry 15, 18 years ago. Now it's quite prolific, and it's very troubling, and it's probably the main reason that we're here today.
Thank you, Ryan. And by the way, in the back, there's copies of Ryan's book, which is called Gunfight, which chronicles this change. I recommend you all reading it. Chief, thank you so much for joining us, you and your team joining us this morning. Could you speak to the changes you've seen in terms of the kinds of threats police officers are facing given the proliferation of guns on our streets? And how has that changed the kind of precautions that your officers need to take? How do you strike that balance that Mayor Greenberg was talking about?
Absolutely. Good morning. So between myself and my colleagues over there and retired Detective Baker in the back, is over 150 years of experience in policing in this room right now. And what we've seen in my tenure of 26 years of serving, when we encountered individuals who had a weapon and that we were trying to detain or apprehend because they were using that weapon to commit a crime, they were not intending on hurting officers. That was not the culture 20-something years ago. The culture then was to, let me get away, let me discard this weapon as far as I can away from me to dissociate myself with that particular weapon. Am I correct over there, guys? That was the mindset of those individuals that we encounter. Now, we are seeing where those individuals who do not have the right to have a weapon in their possession are convicted, felons and so forth, and are committing heinous crimes within our community. They're now challenging us with that very weapon. And so now we're faced with this challenging of those individuals who do not want to abide by the rules and regulations of our city and don't want to be held accountable. just as we say we want officers to be held accountable, then the actual offenders within our city and abroad need to be held accountable as well. And so now we have this challenging mechanism because they are armed. And let me say this, the capacity in which they were using back then always outweighed what law enforcement actually had. So we were up against those individuals who had high capacity weapons opposed to us having a revolver back in the day. And so we were always faced with that, but the mentality was different. The culture was different from what we are facing today. And so our challenges now is how do we actually continue to police correctly, abide by the Constitution, always adhering to those who have a right to bear arms and to have those weapons, that are legally able to have those weapons, but yet and still actually deter crime from our communities and actually deter those individuals from committing heinous crimes in our area, but also to treat them with humanity. That is the balancing. That is the balancing act. Because again, at the end of the day, we want to remove those guns off of our street, but yet and still, we do not want to lose the humanity that we should be seeing in each and every one that we encounter. So those are some of the challenges and some of the differences from what we experienced before and what we're facing today.
Thank you, Chief. David, let's turn to you. You're a self-described health nerd and businessman. And by the way, Mr. Mayor, I really appreciate the way you framed this whole crisis as a health crisis and to see this through the prism of health. And I'm really happy that a number of doctors are very active here in Louisville to try to take a leadership role in changing our and enacting some sensible reforms because doctors are a respected segment of our society. But David, you've had a lot of experience, of course, as a business person and as a concerned, involved community member. Do you see a point where there becomes a geography of places that employers, employees, family would prefer to go because, or on the other side, avoid because of the proliferation of guns and gun violence?
Well, thank you, Ambassador, for the question, and thanks for including me on this panel. There's a lot of expertise about gun violence up here that I don't have, so I'll draw on some of the things that I do know. And, I'll start personally. I'm 65 years old, spent the majority of my life in Louisville, and I've lost 6 people close to me to gun violence. Half of them are suicides, and half homicides. And I suspect I'm not that different from an awful lot of Americans. Many have vastly worse experience. But let me segue from that. From the healthcare nerd perspective, it's important to realize what we're talking about when we talk about gun violence. The majority of gun deaths are suicides. 54% in 2021, which was the last year we have. The next largest category is, homicides that are either domestic violence, street crime, some of them are gang violence, but a random or an interpersonal anger element. Police shootings are a very tiny fraction. Accidents are a horrific but still very tiny fraction. But the big numbers, when we think about how do we move this public health disaster, are in suicide avoidance and street crime avoidance. And I just want to start by endorsing the word that the chief used, humanity, because I think in both of those cases, that's important. The topic of today is what can we do locally? So I'll just throw out what can local employers do? I'm not going to talk about the Constitution or vast changes. Those are important too. But one thing we might do is look at this as an opportunity for Louisville. There is a lot of innovative work going on in mental health care. We learned a lot in the pandemic about working with people remotely, about spreading our resources in a time of desperation further. We have learned a lot about, from the openness of the military, of veterans, and the, increasingly the police, the uniformed services, about mental health issues, about the risk of suicide. we've got a shot to build on that. And I guess I would call locally on employers. Look at your benefit structure. Look at your workplace culture. Can you do things to make workplaces kinder, safer, friendlier, tune down a little bit, in the emotion? And, again, what can we do locally? It's going to be a softer list than constitutional change. But that would be, one thing I would call out. Let's improve our workplace culture. Moving the needle on suicides could have a huge impact, and tuning people down from the anger that they take out in the world could help.
Thank you, David. Let's turn now to Dr. Jones. Dr. Jones, you would not have applied to the Naval Academy if you had not understood the importance of guns and weapons in our defense of our country.
I knew nothing about guns before I went to the Naval Academy. They taught me a lot about them, though.
Well, my question is, how have your views as a former military person, how have your views changed about guns in our culture?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me do this. Thank you all for coming out very early. As we talk about the Naval Academy, when my alarm clock went off at 6 o'clock this morning, it reminded me of my plebe year at Navy, and it was painful. And some of my colleagues, I think, are going through the same pain. So thank you all for getting up very early. I will say this: thanks to Business First for partnering with the Envirome this morning, and let me give a shameless plug for the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute. I think that we are a juggernaut in the town right now about dealing with hard issues and dealing with them head on. This is brainchild of Christy Brown, and so we love her for that. And under the leadership of Aruni Bhaktagor and my friend Ted Smith, we're not running from things. We're not running from them. So when you talk about guns, that's something we're not running from either. Kudos to Ryan Busse, and I want to deflect back to him because Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I'm the Baldwin King." That's James Baldwin and Martin Luther King Jr., scholar in residence at Envirome. And King said, "There comes a time when silence is betrayal." And I talk a lot about the culture of silence even here in Louisville. So I'm happy to hear the mayor saying, look, we got to hit things head on. And thanks to the mayor, and especially thanks to my sister Joy McAtee, who was our first, not donor, but partner in our efforts at Envirome, and not dealing with some type of milquetoast conversation about diversity, which gets really, really watered down and particularly doesn't talk about Black people these days. We're dealing with the Black experience in this country and abroad, and we're especially dealing with anti-Black racism. I mean, that's what Envirome is doing. We think we're going to be at the tip of the spear on that. Now, my view of guns and police and all of these things, I think, I would rather live in a society with police than without police. But that doesn't mean police can't do better. So when you offer critique of police, especially as they relate to my community, the Black community here in Louisville and outside my hometown of Atlanta and everywhere else, that doesn't mean that there can't be corrections made, right? So corrections can be made, and you don't hate police because you offer that. Just like with the gun industry, you don't have to hate guns to say there need to be some corrections made. Ryan is really interesting. I see him as a real world John Dutton. For those of you who watch Yellowstone, I mean, the man is actually from Montana at the core. I think he's really misunderstood too. At his core, he was a conservationist. All of this was about the land, right? And beyond that, he didn't adhere to the silence. He was making a lot of money in the gun industry. He ruined a man named Ed Schultz. You can tell that story, Ryan Busse, about what you did to Ed Schultz, you and your friends, right? You have to take responsibility for that. But I'll say this to you. Race plays into this, and people don't talk about it. He does talk about it. And I'll toss it to you if I could, brother moderator, because I think these words will trigger you. You're an evil little bastard. You know that? What's that about?
Those are the words that my book opens with. For those of you who haven't read it, my book opens at a Black Lives Matter rally in Kalispell, Montana. I never thought I would see 1,500 people. For those of you who don't know Kalispell and surrounding area, there's a lot of right-wing racist hate groups there. There's a lot of ugliness there, but on that day, I saw a lot of beauty. 1,500 people in a small town in northwestern Montana. My son was one of them, and he was attacked by what they call themselves as Second Amendment patriots, right? Armed guys screaming at him, grabbing him, and calling him an evil little bastard in a very tense moment. And for me, I was still in the industry when that happened. That was, I believe it was June 6, 2020. And I saw, it was as if I was a food executive walking in a grocery store, and I had, perhaps my product was macaroni and cheese, and I looked up on the shelf, and I'm like, oh, there's my product. That's what I felt. That's what I felt about that guy that was attacking my son. I'm like, oh, there's my industry's product. It was very difficult to deal with, and it was very up close and personal.
By the way, I really admire people who step into the arena and fight for what they believe. Ryan, again, to you, you advocate for a sensible gun policy in your book and causes and the causes you fight for. What does that policy look like? And talk about, because you come from a very rural area. This is an urban environment, obviously. How does gun policy differ, or the issue differ, in a rural versus urban setting?
So I really don't think there's any difference. I think there's only difference in the needed quantity of it. If any gun person knows, who's raised in gun culture, knows that the more of your guns you have in close proximity to other people, the more careful you have to be. It's just a simple rule of gun safety. If you go to a gun range with, and any gun aficionado, right, left, or center politically, knows if you go to a gun range, because there are lots of guns around and because there are lots of people around, there are lots of rules you have to adhere to, or people are going to get hurt. It's just, it's almost like rules of physics. Lots of people in proximity to things that go bang, be careful. So when the difference between those safety rules and requirements and norms in a rural environment versus an urban environment, it just has to do with the number of guns and people in close proximity to each other. You just have to be more careful, not less. And we seem to be on this trajectory in many places in the country where we're actually doing the opposite of that. We seem to think that we can put more people and more guns in tighter spaces and be less careful. And I don't know, why are we surprised that bad things happen when we do that? I would be shocked if they didn't happen, and I'm shocked that they don't happen more regularly, as horrible as things are. So for me, no difference. It's just, there's no difference in the rules of firearm safety. You just need more of them when you're in tighter proximity with more people.
Thank you. Chief, what if you had a magic wand, what changes would you make? Let's say Mayor Greenberg were allowed to set his own regulations on guns and not be overridden by the legislature. What would those regulations look like? If you had a magic wand, what would you do to improve gun safety?
Can I have more than one?
Yeah, you can.
I got a
do
big job
several.
here. I need ones.
You can talk about several steps.
Thank you. Well, first of all, for the mayor's initiative in trying to actually allow Louisville to operate independent and be Louisville, right? And that I'm really a big advocate for that. And having the ability to actually us manage what we do with the weapons that we confiscate. Let's start there. And that we manage that, and we are putting out a plan that we all agree on and that we see it through. That's one. That would be a magic wand for me. But another thing for gun violence as a whole, and Ryan has spoke so passionately about it, and it goes back, if I had a magic wand, that people will see the weapons as a tool and not used as an ego, not used as a mechanism to solve your problems, not used as a sounding board for your own personal agenda, but actually used for what it is intended for. That would be one of my things that I would use that wand for, because what we are seeing is, even in gun violence with our gangs and in underserved communities that we're trying to hear and to get a handle on, and we're hearing the cries of people that are just struggling and saying, I want change, is that we are seeing that others are not willing to actually use effective conflict resolution for their concerns and problems. And that is a concern within Louisville. Social media is playing a big role in this. And we cannot overlook that we're inundated with media all the time, saturating our children. And yet and still, we don't cut off time with social media as a parent. And so if I had that magic wand, that we will look at the weapons as a tool and not based upon and use as a ego tool or basis or premise or your own agenda, but that we're using it in the right manner and we're being actually responsible as that tool that we have. Those are my wants. Mayor, can you make it happen? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief. David, you've had a lot of experience in the educational arena in Louisville, and so much of this involves, sadly, school shootings. And I'm wondering how the school shootings have affected the atmosphere and in elementary, secondary, middle, and high school environments. What worries you, and are the students thinking about all this differently as they go to school than they did 20 years ago?
Well, sorry. But, once again, the chief already hit on a really important point: how our children being socialized around guns, and the notion of the gun in some ways like the muscle car of a earlier era. A powerful tool that can do immense damage if the young, unformed brain and emotional cortex, runs wild with it under crazy influences. So I'd like that wand also for our teachers and school leaders. But I think the biggest my biggest observation about the damage that school shootings are doing to our children, and don't get me wrong, that there's nothing more horrible than reading and seeing the images and just sort of praying that they're not coming to your school. And I should have mentioned the mass shooting at Preston Point came to my office, and thank God the police were there in 3 minutes, or it would have worked its way up to the third floor, maybe where my colleagues were that morning. So it's awful. But again, there are civic leaders, policymakers here. From a nerd perspective, the biggest damage is done by the fear, by teaching our kids to be afraid of an event that is of vanishingly low probability statistically. Now, the increase might continue. It could get way worse. But at the moment, kids die from guns, from suicide, accident, homicide, vastly more than they do in schools. So as we think about our policy, by all means make schools safe, but the most important thing to do with schools is keep them open all the time, because children are much safer in school than they are anywhere else. All right, there are no guns in the cabinet, there are no unlocked guns on top of the refrigerator, there's no poison under the sink in the bathroom. I mean, all of the things that endanger children, and they can't just run outside and get hit by a car or engaged in some neighborhood stuff. So, this is an area that, and I'm not going to criticize our school system for closing during the pandemic. That was a time of great uncertainty. I think we all would agree, if we had it to do over with the knowledge we have, we would keep the schools open and not inflict fear of something that turned out not to be very risky for kids or teachers on them. But this notion that, oh, we have a shortage of bus drivers. Everybody has a shortage of everything today if you're an employer. And we're just going to reflexively close the schools for a couple weeks? They're still not open for preschoolers. I mean, schools have to be open so our children are safe, and so they learn that stuff happens and you still get up and put on your clothes and go about your business. So that would be my plea. Again, the context is, what can we do locally? We can't probably change armament rules that will reduce school shootings locally. but we can keep our schools open, and we should.
Thank Thank you, David. Dr. Jones, let's go back to you. Ryan, in his book, chronicles how the pendulum has swung so far in the direction of gun violence and the advertising from, and we can't have a discussion about this issue in our country because it's so polarized and there's a stalemate. You're a student of history. How do you think the pendulum will swing back? Are you optimistic or pessimistic? How do you feel?
I don't know exactly where we go, but I think historically we really need to have people actually read and contextualize the Second Amendment, understand what it was about, the idea of a well-ordered militia and things of that nature doesn't mean that everybody has to have a gun. We have too many guns in our society. My daughter and I just got back from Northern Ireland, spent the week in Belfast City. And those of you familiar with Belfast, you know about the Troubles. Certainly any of my brothers and sisters here of Irish descent. So you're talking 3 decades of just all-out warfare in a city, in a region, between nationalists and loyalists. One thing that Belfast City did, Northern Ireland did, it's very hard to get your hands on guns now in that area. And I understand that there's some countries that have high rates of gun ownership and low rates of violence. But Ireland took a different approach. Belfast is largely gun-free at this point. But I think with all the pressures that we're talking about in our society and what they do to people, you know, Ryan talks about, he talks about the intersection of politics and guns and ideology. You know, that's really important. But some of this stuff is real world and real personal for us, right? I just don't think it should be so easy to get guns. At core, I'm a teacher. And I've invested my entire career in children. You know, I still look at college students as my kids. Osha Shireman was one of my kids back in the day. Brilliant. One of the most brilliant kids that I taught in my entire career was a young man who went to school right across from the University of Louisville over at Manual High School. Incredible mind, incredible mind. And I met him as a high school student, thought he was going to leave Louisville, decided to stay here. Comes to my office, and I'm like, what the hell are you still doing here? And he said, everybody can't leave, Doc. You know, I really want to stay and help the city. Something happens to this kid where mentally he loses it. I still go see him almost weekly down in Grayson County where he's in prison now because he got his hands on a gun even though those of us around him knew that he was having mental issues. And so one of my students takes a shot at one of my friends, Craig Greenberg, almost kills him. Luckily, he did not. His name's Quintez Brown. So the conversation about health and his mental state is important to have. And Craig and I have talked about this, I might be the only person in the city who knows both people. So we have a friend who's so incredibly important to the city, he will become the mayor, he's directing the course of the city now, almost loses his life. And then we have this brilliant young man who has a mental break and may be sent away for God knows how long. Another life lost because of access to a weapon. So what's going on with our culture that these things are so easy to get our hands on? So when we get away from the abstractions and the philosophical engagements and talk about real world stuff, that's when the rubber really hits the road, right? So we talked to Ryan about what was done to his son, his 12-year-old son. That gets real. You know, we talk about a kid losing his life and rotting away in prison where they won't even give him decent books to read. That's real. We talk about Craig almost losing his life because of gun violence. You know, that gets real. So what can we do historically? We can understand you know, what the proliferation of guns was really about. Ryan does a great job of what's driving this right now, engaging organizations like the NRA. Ryan is like, look, people think that politics is driving the NRA. He's like, look, I think it's actually in reverse. Organizations like the NRA are actually driving politics. So we got to have hard-hitting discussions with our best and brightest, having those discussions. And I encourage people in Louisville, don't shy away from hard-hitting conversations, whether it's about gun violence, about race, about anything, with people who are pressing us to the wall, right, and making us think. That's incredibly important. That's what Ryan has done with his book. He's making us think and really engage what's going on. So that's my view on some of this. And it's
Thank you, Dr. Jones.
But your bow tie.
And you're talking about the Second Amendment. I will defend to the death anyone's right to own a musket.
like a good Massachusetts boy would, right?
Well, let's turn to the audience. We have a mic here, a standing mic, in this aisle over here. Could you step up to the mic, or you can use this?
My name is Mike O'Connell. I'm the Jefferson County Attorney here.
Big Mike.
Hey, Doctor. Nice to see you as always. I'm going to be very quick, but I'm going to read something that everybody in this room needs to hear. And I would bet that 98% of the people in this room have never heard it, word for word for word. I'm also an Army veteran. I was a armor officer, which translates into being a tank platoon leader. I have fired everything that we make that didn't get dropped out of an airplane. Okay, so I'm passionate about this issue. We have a domestic violence division in my office dedicated, and the judiciary of this country is trying to tell us at this point that a domestic violence perpetrator cannot own or can possess a handgun while a case is pending. We know that 40% of women who are killed in domestic violence situations are killed with a handgun. It's insane what's going on. There are some cases trickling up to the U.S. Supreme Court in this session that are going to look at this, but I don't have high hopes about any of it. But what I'm going to do, if you'll bear with me, we have a statute or statutes in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and this statute and Kentucky is known nationally to have gun preemption laws on steroids. They are known in this country to have laws that are extreme preemption laws. Now I'm going to read it, if you'll bear with me, KRS 65.870. It's styled local firearm control ordinances prohibited, exemption from immunity, declaratory and injunctive relief. There are several paragraphs in here, but I'm going to read just this one. No existing or future city, county, urban county government, charter county, consolidated local government, unified local government, special district, local or regional public or quasi-public agency, board, commission, department, public corporation, or any person acting under the authority of any of these organizations may occupy any part of the field of regulation of the manufacture, sale, purchase, taxation, transfer, ownership, possession, carrying, storage, or transportation of firearms, ammunition, components of firearms, components of ammunition, firearm accessories, or combination thereof. That is Kentucky law. As we sit in this room today, that is the law that we are forced at this point, hopefully it could get amended or even repealed, but it is, as I said, it is preemption on steroids. This mayor and this Metro Council can't do a damn thing while we're sitting in here. We can speak, we can hope, we can try to persuade, we can try to do all these things, but we can't pass one simple ordinance. I was also a judge, both district court and circuit court. I sat in juvenile court. I've had young men tell me now, and we deal with them in juvenile court, it's easier to get it's easier to get a gun than weed. In this city. So I applaud you, Mr. Busse, for what you've done, and I'm glad that you have been able to attract these people to this room. And as a very respected constitutional law professor said recently, I'm not asking anybody to repeal the Second Amendment. I'm asking them to read the Second Amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to comment just quickly on that, and he's quoting the esteemed Jamie Raskin there. And the Bruin case, the Bruin Supreme Court case, which Mike references there, is throwing a lot of stuff into turmoil, throwing our legal system with regards and regulatory system with regards to guns in a lot of turmoil. That's why the truth is the legal atmosphere is probably going to be pretty difficult. What doesn't have to be difficult is our system of norms of behavior. We can reinstitute those. We can change that. That doesn't take a 2/3 majority in the Senate. That is not subject to the filibuster. And so much of the damaging, irresponsible behavior that I witnessed has to do with norms of behavior in our country and responsibility and decency.
Yeah, but Ryan, how easy is that? And you talk about this a lot, about how Americans have basically been rewired around a culture of fear. Like people talk a lot about we've never been this divided. I mean, I'm black. We went through the Civil War, slavery, Jim Crow. There have been a lot of things racially where we've really, really been divided. But it seems folk who look like you are really hostile towards one another now in a way that we have not seen. So you talk about this reinstituting of norms. How do you do that in a society where the politics, when I talk about politics, not just voting, but that system that decides who gets what, when, where, and how, where people have been utterly convinced that folk are coming to take what they have and they are armed to the teeth. How do you rewire that?
That's not a we. So we meaning I lay a lot of the blame for this at the feet of the NRA, and my book essentially makes the argument that the divided, radicalized political culture where now families hate each other and workplaces hate each other, and that's all the zero-sum politics of the NRA. That didn't just happen. The NRA didn't just create that. It may feel like it, but it took them 25 years to do it, of really concerted, incremental changes that they instituted. But it was a small group of people, frankly, most of them not all that smart, I know them. We can undo that system. It's a system that's created. It's not, as I was telling Christy, it's not as though a law of physics, gravity, was thrust upon us and we must deal with it. Well, that's bullshit. We created the system. We can uncreate it. And I think it will take small, incremental, concerted social efforts by people like are in this room. And the last thing I'll say is there's a lot more support out there than it may feel like now. I sense the anger and frustration in Mike's voice, and a lot of people share that because sometimes it feels like this veneer of radicalization is a lot thicker than it actually is. I don't believe that. When I wrote my book, I thought I had been inside, been very close to this, seen my son attacked. I thought, I'm going to get 500 angry emails and messages, and my kids are going to be attacked when they go to public school, and my wife and I might get shot at when we go to the grocery store. It's going to be horrific. Well, the opposite happened. The opposite. I hardly ever get an angry one, and when I do, 2/3 of the world's words aren't spelled correct, and there's not a single grammatically correct sentence in it. The rest of them are effusive from all across the country. They identify, they're gun owners who can't take it anymore. And so have faith that this thing that you think you're living with isn't as thick and powerful as it feels like it is.
Can I want to throw this out, and Mayor, you can talk, but for the prosecutors and for the chief, again, this panel is about what can Louisville do, all right? And one of my questions, my observation from the January 6th prosecutions is, oh, look, there are an awful lot of laws on the books that if you enforce them, they defang a lot of excitement. We've got laws against aggravated menacing. Menacing with a weapon is crime, I think, in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. And I guess my question would be, why do we let people march around and intimidate fellow citizens? That's a form of assault. And I guess my question is, why don't we use the laws that we have? Is that blocked by the state?
And by the way, no responsible gun owner is okay with armed radicals marching up and down the streets with rifles intimidating people.
And
a
no,
democracy
sure.
cannot exist at the barrel of a gun. It cannot.
Yeah. But I again, is it already, is that a power that we have and we're not using?
I mean, if I can answer that, I mean, we're in this day in, day out. I don't think that's the case. I mean, we take criminal violations very seriously, to the extent you can. But what I just read up there a moment ago, what I didn't tell you was that has a criminal component to it that says any leaders, elected officials, whoever you are, that violate what I just read are subject to being criminally prosecuted. Okay, indicted for felonies or misdemeanors if you do anything that violates what I just read.
I didn't hear anything that you just read that said you can't prosecute crimes.
No, we do that. You're right. That's the criminal.
And menacing is a crime, right?
Yes.
Okay. It's subject to interpretation, or they don't see that as menacing in their mind.
Well, but again, the criminal doesn't get to decide what.
No, I'm talking about the politicians, unless you're calling them criminals too.
Let's turn the floor over to Mayor Greenberg.
When we're talking about some of these laws, you heard Mike talk about one of the challenges. We have another insane law in the Commonwealth that says the gun that Ricky talked about earlier that was used to try to kill me, the gun that was killed 5 people at Old National Bank in Kentucky, all of those confiscated weapons are required to be turned over to the state, who in turn auctions them off and they end up back on the street. That's one of the many. I think if you looked around our state, Louisville definitely, but our state, people would agree on things like waiting periods for first-time gun buyers, for extreme risk protection orders, background checks, whatever. There's going to be difference of opinion, of course, but on some things there probably is a majority of people who believe in some changes to the laws of our state. But here in Louisville, we live in Louisville, and we've got an entire state. I'm curious, from your perspective, working in the gun industry and living in Montana, a rural state like Kentucky, what is your advice to us city folk as we are talking to rural legislators who have a very different culture of guns that you described growing up with? How do we connect with them to try to reach common ground so we're not fighting and we're not arguing about the gun culture that you and many others are understandably proud of, and that's part of your life? But how do we focus on constructive steps forward, even if small steps forward? Give us some advice on having those conversations in a constructive way.
Do you have a harder question? I'm going to give kind of it'll sound like a broad, somewhat generic answer, but I think of this as key to advancing the policy and the health of this city and the rest of our country. I think when change comes to this issue, it's going to come because responsible gun owners finally said, I've had it. I've had enough. This is not me. And one of the reasons that doesn't currently happen is because there's a culture of aggrievement that tells rural voters, gun-owning people, that progressives hate them and want to do away with all their firearms. Now, I know that's hooey, as Jill Lepore would have said the other night. But I think the first step to making this better is figuring out a way to overtly and purposefully celebrate responsible gun owners. It's tough to do that sometimes. I know people that work in this. I advise a lot of groups, and it's people say that, and they indicate they do it, but it's really tough to do it. To bring people in, put them on panels like this, and celebrate their culture. They are responsible. You know, let's face it. A family who has generations of gun owners and who maybe owns 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 dozen guns and has never had any gun violence in their family, it's pretty exceptional, right? They have gun safety culture, they respect gun. We should celebrate that. If we don't figure out a way to celebrate that, this divide's going to just keep getting worse.
Hi, my name is Megan. I work for Mayor Greenberg. I originally came from Pennsylvania, very rural area. I grew up on a farm. Culture of responsible gun ownership, of hunting. My father's, most treasured possession is a 30-06 that he inherited from his grandfather. I have a personal experience of gun violence as a very small child. A family friend who was 10 years old was at another friend's house, and he was handling a gun that was not properly stored and shot and killed himself while one of my best friends was present in the home and her brother was present in the home. So one of the reasons I have small children, I'll never let my child go over to a house without asking about gun ownership and safe storage. So that is my question about gun responsibility and safe storage. One is, how can we have a conversation about safe storage of firearms that you own that people can have, that is not emotional, it's not accusatory, but that promotes a culture of responsibility, of understanding the tools that you have in your home and the destruction that they can cause in your own family, that would actually promote using it? And how can the industry actually promote safe storage as a business tool? I mean, it is an accessory that really they should be wanting to sell more of. So it's kind of a two-part question.
Safe storage is a big deal. I think, just so you understand the issue, we're trying to advance it here. Remember, a lot of firearms, especially in the last 2 to 3 years, have been purchased because people are understandably, sometimes it seems like it's irrational, but they're fearful of a really dangerous situation they might be in, right? They're worried somebody might come in their house. Now, you may think it's irrational, but they have this firearm because they believe they need it to be ready immediately. And so safe storage is often pushed back against because essentially people are saying, okay, I need this gun at the ready, and yet you're telling me I have to put it in a safe and therefore it's not at the ready. So just understand the fear-based impetus to purchase the gun in the first place. And I'm sure you've heard this pushback, but there are now cheap biometric safes where you put your finger on it and it snaps, put your 3 fingers on it, it snaps open. I mean, they're $40, $50. And you're right, the industry should want to sell them, and they do want to sell them, they just don't want to require them. I think, for me, if you purchase a gun to save yourself and your family, then the first thing you ought to do is worry about saving yourself and your family. So we know that if guns are left unsecured in a home, your risk of one of your family members committing suicide with that gun goes up about 500%. Well, that sounds like my family's less safe, right? So that's kind of the way I attack it. It's your response. If you're worried about saving your family, let's start with saving your family.
Just to add, there are some interesting innovations going on right now. The veteran suicide rate is about double the civilian suicide rate for comparable demographics, and that issue is getting a lot more attention, a lot more openness in that community. Mental health challenges, isolation, PTSD, all of these things are able to be talked about in a way that they weren't some time ago. But USAA, a big insurer of military veterans down in San Antonio, Humana Military here, and a bunch of other ones have partnered with veterans associations specifically on safe storage, safe gun storage, as a family safety, personal safety tool in the veteran community, and also the sort of peer-to-peer mental health, kind of how do we help each other stuff. So there is innovation going on, and new people who will speak about it.
Let's give special thanks again to the University of Louisville, Christina Lee Brown Envirom Institute for bringing us together for this conversation. We're going to publish a recap of this in print and digital editions of Business First so we can bring it to the broader audience. Thank you all so much for spending some time with us. I encourage you to continue this conversation in your circles and in your community. Thank you all.